Dit is Dinsdag die 12de Maart. Goeienaand. Ek het nou 'n bietjie gedink oor hierdie boekvoorlesings en ek kan myself indink dat as mens daarna luister, dan wil mens jou oor toemaak en daarna luister asof dit net klank is. Kyk, ek het mos aan die begin gedink ek wil 'n podcast begin in plaas van 'n YouTube kanaal, omdat dit eintlik audio is. En die ware toets vir boekvoorlesings lê daarin dat as 'n mens mos na jou as jy net luister sonder beeld, dan moet dit goed op die oor val. En my niggie wat in Amerika bly, sê Suid-Afrikaners wat Engels praat, klink asof hulle baie hard probeer om Engels te praat. Dit klink of hulle te hard probeer. Nou, ek dink dit is hoe ek vir myself klink met die Engels, om aksente na te maak en foutloos te lees en so aan, is nie op hierdie stadium uitvoerbaar vir my. Ek weet nie of uitvoerbaar die regte woord is nie, maar jy weet wat ek bedoel. Okay, so ek probeer hard, maar ek moet dit laat klink asof ek nie te hard probeer nie. Hoe dit ook al sê, ek hoop jy geniet dit. Kom ons gaan aan met The Long Lost Grave. Cathy smiled thinly. Very well then. He has waited long enough. Let's go. She unceremoniously marched from the office with Gabby on her heels. But he noticed that her hair was freshly combed and that the little flower had been dropped on her blotter. A day filled with surprises, he thought. Rob and Harry stood in the lobby. Cathy stopped short, hands akimbo, watching them with a cool aloofness. Well, gentlemen, she said frostily, I understand you have an appointment with the warden. Well, not exactly. Rob grinned awkwardly, seeing her raised eyebrow. But Anne, Miss Crawford, has made reservations for us. She said she had talked to you. His voice trailed off. Young Gabby fidgeted with a clipboard in his hands. Herbie simply stood amused, a twinkle in his eyes as he watched Rob and his future wife. Mr. Dubois, Rob Dubois. Cathy stared into his eyes. Yes, Anne booked for you and your brother, and I've been expecting you. The solemn grey-blue eyes flickered to Herbie, noticing his amusement, and then back to Rob. But she did not tell me why. Rob took a folded paper from his pocket and gave it to her. We are here to do an article on marine life. That's our formal permission letter from our headquarters for diving and underwater photography in the park area. They told me they would inform you. Cathy quietly read through the typed permission letter, of which she already had a copy, but she didn't tell him that. She looked up at him, smiling. You two can drive, I presume? Rob didn't miss the sarcasm. Young Gabby was about to have a fit. Herbie answered grinningly humbly. I admit, Miss Moore, that I can hardly bear to stick my head under the water, but Rob here was a lifesaver while at school, a diver in the Special Forces, and he smirked at Rob. I believe he bathes fairly often nowadays, at least once or maybe twice a week. Rob cast a warning look at him. See that his younger brother can hardly contain himself. Cathy chuckled, looking at Herbie. Then I think he will be safe in the small tidal pools if you keep an eye on him. Herbie laughed with her. It sounds like a conspiracy, Rob growled, glancing at Gabby for support. I will tell Raphael to open the gate, Mr. Dubois, he said quickly, uncertain as to the course of events. Call me Rob, just Rob. And he made a firm ally. Gabby, show them the spot under the trees near the sea, Cathy instructed more friendly, mollified by Herbie's spontaneous siding with her. She suddenly smiled, catching them by surprise. Well then, welcome to the Tsetsikama Park. She watched them leave, a strange feeling inside her. She realized with surprise that she was looking forward to the next month or so. It took them the best part of the afternoon to establish their base camp under and behind a cluster of dense trees overlooking the sea and rocky shore. Perfectly situated for their purpose, out of sight from the road and paths, and a stone's throw away from the water's edge, it was peaceful and breathtakingly beautiful. They had a 3-room house tent comprising of a room for each and the kitchen living area in the larger front part, which was opened outward onto posts, forming a canvas veranda. Outside, in the front of the tent, was a rectangular folding table with accompanying benches. Off the main tent at one side of the half square was a large, white, steep-roofed tent for their supplies and equipment. Opposite, forming a third side on the half square, was a canvas lean-to. This housed the petrol-driven compressor for the purpose of filling diving sets and twin rows of yellow oxygen cylinders. Also present was a Mark II rubber dinghy with a 15 horsepower Yamaha outboard motor. The last and front end of the square was left open, facing out over the sea. Within a few hours, they had a comfortable camp with multiple other camping necessities arranged in and around the tents. Next to the lean-to, protected against the sun and wind, Rob stretched 2 steel wires. Securing the last end with a vicious twist, he grunted satisfied and tested the tension. Perfect. Okay, Herbie, he called. Here is the place to dry out wetsuits. And the fishing rods. Herbie came from behind the tent carrying the 2 long flexible rods. Our place looks real inviting, even though I have to say so myself. You got the fridge working? Herbie nodded. And the beer is cooling. And the trunk? Locked and in your room. Good. Rob was satisfied. Camp properly set up, beer cooling with the sun dipping in the west, they were ready to start their search in the morning. How long it would take, he had no idea, but at least they were here. Later, over a beer with a braai going strong, they toasted their success in the fading twilight. To the liberty, Rob said. To the liberty, Herbie echoed. At daybreak, with the orange ball of the sun just peeping over the ocean, the 2 men were drinking steaming mugs of sweet black coffee. In between, shivering with the last chill of the night, they hunched over the 1 to 50,000 scale map obtained from Janine Jansen from the South African Army Women's College in George, and on which Rob had carefully planned the search. An incredibly large area with almost no leads other than it was somewhere near the east of the river mouth. Further, they had to keep up the pretext of an underwater study of the marine life, and for that reason Rob had brought his expensive underwater photography equipment along. While Herbie folded the maps away, Rob went through the painstaking process of loading the camera with high-speed color film and sealing it in the watertight Perspex casing. They were ready for day 1. While inspecting the area earlier on, as well as advised by Gabby Wilson, Rob decided that there was only one safe place from where to launch the rubber dinghy. From the little sheltered and shingled beach near the suspension bridge in the river mouth. Fortunately, it was not too far away and more than safe place to leave the dinghy and the engine overnight. Gabby, who popped in out of pure curiosity, was quickly commandeered to help with the conveying of the boat and gear to the beach. After inflating the dinghy with the compressor, they lifted it onto the back of Gabby's Datsun pickup. Also a white one, Rob noticed Riley, although considerably cleaner on the outside than the other one he knew. With the two brothers on the back holding onto the equipment, Gabby drove to the little beach, glad to be of help. It was still early, and as they passed one of the rondavels, they saw Cathy Moore coming through the back door. Staring at the overload vehicle, she shook her head in disbelief. There was an amused smile on her face, and to their surprise, she waved at them. With their hands full, they could only grin in return. Gabby drove as far as the road allowed and helped them carry the gear down to the beach. When they finally had everything there, they were sweating profusely. Rob was certain that young Gabby would probably steer clear of them in the future, but Gabby faithfully helped them until they had pushed off and Rob Poole started the outboard monitor. The little motor, which they had bought second-hand in Cape Town, ran smoothly as Rob steered out of the river. He followed the rocky shore, staying well out of the dangerous areas of the breaking waves. Herbie sat opposite him on the furthest pontoon, his feet awkwardly over the equipment which cramped the boat. He looked rather uncomfortable and watched the dinghy's process dubiously. But Rob wasn't worried at all. Many years of experience had taught him the tremendous capabilities and durability of rubber boats. And contrary to Herbie's nervous expression, his face was flushed with excitement. The very first dive of many that lay ahead. For a while longer they carried on eastward, gently gliding up, over and down the larger swells. But it was enough to upset less seafaring men like Herbie. When Rob finally told him to drop the folding anchor, it was none too soon. He was sweating and felt nauseous. Two sure signs of inevitable seasickness. However, once in the water, it will disappear. Riding the seesaw waves obediently at the tiny spiked anchor, the dinghy lay on the outside and furthest point from where Rob wanted to execute the grid search. From there, they would meticulously search closer to shore and westwards. It seemed a formidable task. And judging by Herbie's pale features, it wasn't going to be easy. Already dressed in wetsuits, they quickly donned the rest of the gear, strapped on the yellow 10-liter oxygen cylinders, and with a last look up at the early morning sky, dropped backwards into the blue waters. Rob shivered as the icy water ran down his spine, sucked up into the neoprene of his zero wetsuit. But it didn't bother him. He knew that within minutes the water would be the same as his body temperature. The water would form a protective layer of warmer water around his body, the unique principle of the wetsuit. Rob breathed evenly through the demand valve, also known as a DV, and ran his hands over the front of his buoyancy compensator, locating the emergency cord, and turned to Herbie, satisfied that all was well. Herbie also seemed satisfied, giving the OK sign with a thumb and forefinger pressed together in a O. Rob did an awkward jackknife and began to kick downwards. Herbie followed, his eyes fixed on the yellow cylinder in front of him as they finned downwards. What he had told Cathy about his diving powers wasn't exactly an exaggeration. He was indeed a very amateurish diver and did not wish to lose Rob underwater. Neither would Rob want him to. Diving in pairs was a necessity, a golden rule to all divers, so that they could keep an eye on each other. Rob was far more experienced and obviously expected Herbie to follow as number 2. Rob swam with the camera in front of him, heading down. The water was crystal clear and the visibility excellent. Down below, he could make out the white sandy bottom with rocks scattered about. His ears started to pain with the pressure increase, and he equalized quickly by closing his nose with thumb and forefinger and tried to blow out. The increased pressure in the eardrums became the same as outside, and the pain ceased. He glanced at his depth gauge, then at the bottom. He stopped, waiting for Herbie to catch up. Better compress at 10 meters, he decided. There were another 5 to the bottom. 3 minutes later, they continued downwards. They hit the bottom at 17 meters. Herbie gave him the OK signal, which he repeated. Rob finned along the bottom, Herbie to his left, following, and they watched in fascination. The beauty of the submarine life is mysterious, and splendor never cease to intrigue the human mind. Large shoals of gaily colored fish swam past, curiously unafraid, inquisitive. A lonely ray passed them lazily, its wing like a flat body rippling at the sides as it moved, while lonely stalks of kelp stretched up from the rocks like ghosts, swaying and moving with the current. At 17 meters down, with clear water and a bright sun, there were few things so quiet and harmoniously peaceful. Looking up, the mirror reflecting surface, the bottom of the dinghy, the shaft and propeller of the engine heightened the mystical feeling of floating an alien world of peaceful beauty and tranquility. But Rob was minutely aware of the lurking dangers, the deadliness of some of its inhabitants, and the quickness of death. And if you don't know it well, he always advised, exercise the rule to never touch anything with a bare hand. Steer clear of brightly colored fish and other living creatures. Treat the sea and its life with respect. Fear it and it will treat you the same. Even better, you will know how to stay out of trouble. They swam in ever-widening circles around the marker buoy. Rob occasionally took photo shots or stopped to watch or examine some peculiar-looking creatures or objects, but their eyes were continuously combing the bottom in an endless search for any irregularity, a simple thing that might be out of place. They had no idea in which direction the wreck could be. Neither of them had any previous wreck diving experience, and subsequently didn't know what to expect, or actually knew how to conduct an underwater search. But if they had expected to find something during that first dive, they were disappointed. When Rob signaled them up to the surface half an hour later, there was still no sign of the wreck. In fact, it would be many more days before they finally learned more. They surfaced a little distance from the dinghy and swam to it. Rob reached it first, went down and kicked strongly upwards to help him jerk himself double over the pontoon, the heavy cylinder awkwardly handicapping him, but he was aboard. Discarding the cylinder, he took Herbie's and helped him. "Hell," Herbie moaned. "Easy to get in, but damn effort to get out. Cigarette?" "A necessity," said Rob cheerfully, wiping water from his moustache. "This is life. Dwellers of the deep, that's who we are." With awkward, wet fingers, they lit 2 cigarettes. "I love it," he mused. "Dive 1 finished. Many to go. This might take a long time." You can say that again. We are covering too little at a time. Herbie grimaced and spat sideways. Pass me the Coke. Rob uncapped the liter bottle of Coca-Cola, drank and passed it to Herbie. There is nothing like Coca-Cola to fresh the mouth and energy. Shooting the butt into the water, he started the engine while Herbie hoisted the anchor. We'll just ease her a bit closer to the shore and then we'll try again, Rob called as the dinghy spluttered to the new position. Donning full cylinders, they slipped back into the water. They continued this pattern, diving and searching, up for a break, shifting the boat, changing cylinders and down again. Once, during a break, they noticed Cathy Moore ashore. Shading her eyes with one hand against the sun, she stood watching for a cluster of rocks. She stood watching from a cluster of rocks. She answered their wave with a single lift of the hand. Rob scowled when Herbie made some snide remark about unfailing love. I'll get you back, he promised. First there must be a woman, Herbie replied soberly, and then she must seduce me because... He heartedly glanced at Rob. I don't fall for a woman easily. Rob thought of Selena, grimaced and said nothing. Instead, he grabbed Herbie's one foot and jerked it upwards, unsettling him. The latter uttered a desperate cry before splashing into the water, reappearing moments later with a drenched cigarette between the lips. Rob felt strangely avenged and didn't help him back aboard. With all the cylinders and stomachs empty, they headed back to camp. Behind them lay 4 hours of solid diving, not counting the half-hour breaks in between. It had been tiring. Together they secured the dinghy up against the slope shore. While Herbie with the other legs ran back to camp for a car and trailer, Rob carried the diving equipment and empty cylinders from the beach to the landing above. Herbie presently arrived with the equipment loaded on the trailer and they drove back to camp. After a cup of coffee each, Herbie refilled the cylinders for the next day's diving, while Rob changed the film on the underwater camera. When he had finished the maintenance and preparations, there was still a fair deal of daylight left. Herbie longingly looked at the rocks and began preparing his tackle, but Rob was preoccupied with his own thoughts. The day's fruitless diving had made him think. He realized that he would have to streamline their efforts. Diving and searching like today would be too painstakingly slow, and their chances of success slight. Somehow he had to drive a method of covering a large area in less time. Thus, with Herbie gone, he settled with pen and paper. For a while he drew lines, made sketches, looked puzzled and smoked many cigarettes. He still had no answer. How long he had been engaged in this he didn't know, but he became aware of someone watching him, and he swung around. Standing at the edge of the camp with a look of pleasant surprise on her face was Cathy Moore. Rob scrambled to his feet, grinning self-consciously, pushed a hand through his disheveled hair. Quite a setup you've got here, she said frankly as she glanced about the camp. It looks real nice. He shrugged. Someone once told me that any fool can be uncomfortable, but no one needs to be, he chuckled. Since then, I've never forgotten it and I've never been uncomfortable again. He paused and smiled hesitantly. Except perhaps the previous time in this wet forest of yours. I prefer not to talk about the previous incident, she said coolly, and Rob got the idea that he was slipping again. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, he apologized. Please, come and sit down. Care for a beer? I got a message. She hesitated for a moment, seeing the eagerness on his face. All right, he smiled abruptly, coming forward. A beer will be nice. Rob fetched two ice-cold line lagers from the fridge and gave her one and sat opposite her. A glass? She smiled. No thanks, a can is fine. She sipped the foamy beer. And how did it go? He nodded at the camera. I took a few shots, looked around, but there lies a lot of hard work ahead, and many more dives. Rob watched her over his beer, once again struck by her smooth skin, the high cheekbones, and firm, full mouth. He noticed a strange relaxation in the eyes, a peacefulness which he had not seen before. As usual, the rebellious dark hair was framing her face, wisps standing obstinately to the sides, hanging onto her forehead over one cheek. An involuntary shiver ran through him as he absently wiped it from her face. She wiped it absently from her face, looking up into his eyes. For moments they held surprised, tantalized, until she suddenly glanced away, a confused blush on her cheeks. Rob consciously cleared his throat, drank from his beer, and fumbled for a packet of Camel cigarettes. A smoke? He asked to cover his discomfort. Hell, the woman was rattling him far too easily, he thought, feeling warm in the neck. No thanks, she replied in a voice that stirred emotion deep inside him. But you go ahead, I don't mind. He lit the cigarette, inhaling the smoke, acutely aware of her watching him. You mentioned a message? For an instant she looked startled, and then she remembered. Oh yes, I almost forgot why I came here. Someone phoned earlier, a lady. She wanted to know whether or not you were here. That's when I came down to the rocks, but you were too far out. Rob stared at her, a sudden feeling of a bad premonition over him. Who? He asked. Selena, no dear. Kathy noticed the sudden startled expression on his face, a flash of alarm, and then it was gone. She's a friend? Oh no. Rob sat dumbstruck. How the hell did Selena and Odia find out where we were? Or where to look for them? And who else knew? If they, whoever they were, knew where to look for them, then they had to know more than just about the gold coin. They indeed had to know about the Liberty. And Herbie had sworn blue murder that he had not told her anything. How then? He suddenly knew that somewhere something had gone wrong. Someone else knows about the wreck. Oh my, he mumbled. Oh, Kathy, he used her name for the first time. You didn't tell her where we were, did you? Kathy stared in amazement. Of course I did. How was I to know that you wanted to remain here in secrecy? She answered. I only know that you are here, so why shouldn't I answer? I'm sorry, he apologized for the second time. He didn't know how to explain. To her, there was obviously no reason to secrecy on her side, so she did what she thought was right. He fidgeted with his beer can. Ugh, I guess it's nothing serious. It certainly sounds serious, she replied. And if it isn't, then why worry? Who is this woman in any way? She was instantly angry for asking the question. She had no reason to ask, other than plain instinctive curiosity. But the question did not bother Rob, and he shrugged it off. A woman Herbie dated once about a few weeks ago. He'd hoped to hear from her again. The lie came easily, and he drank down the last of his beer to cover the fact. Really not a nice girl. He hushed it up further, glad that Herbie was not there to hear, but more glad that Kathy seemed to accept the lame excuse. She's probably a hooker, he concluded and yawned. Kathy nodded comprehendingly, watching his face as he spoke. Strong lines, attractive features, just as she had imagined it previously. Firm mouth with a strong jaw, covered with stubble, his moustache slightly lighter in color than his hair. And she saw the dried salt crystals on his eyelashes and brows. His hair a dull, dusty black as aftermath of the seawater. One ear was faintly larger than the other, and when he smiled, an impossible look came onto his eyes. He wore a t-shirt, and for the first time she noticed his bulging muscles on his chest and arms as he moved, yet not offensively so. Well built and attractive, she decided firmly. Very attractive, and he can be pleasant. She suddenly realized that she was staring into his eyes, saw perhaps some of her own apprehension in them. Then suddenly she blushed and snapped at him. So, what do you want me to tell any future callers? Hey, I've said I'm sorry. You did the right thing. Let's not argue again. Rob covered hastily as he saw the old battle fires lighting up. Have another beer. She stared at him searchingly, uncertainly, and read the eagerness in his face. Then, happy that he really wanted her to, and she smiled. Yeah, why not? Listen, Kathy, he said later. I'm really sorry about the time in Anne's shop and about the other day. Really, I didn't mean it. You've made quite a fool of me, she shrugged sincerely. I'm sorry, it wasn't meant to be. Well, promise? Rob grinned. Promise. Scout's honor. And with a wildly thumping heart, he saw her lovely smile spreading from her neat teeth between her lips. Her dimpled mouth corners over her face and into those searching grey-blue eyes, sweeping his heart away forever. And he wished he could take her in his arms and never let go. Hi, he heard her say. Saw her smiling at him with a bemused expression. He grinned shyly, suddenly feeling a little vulnerable under her searching gaze. We're having a barbecue on Friday night, she said hopefully. Peter and Anne are coming. You are invited, and of course so is the warden and Gabby. He quickly added as he noticed her hesitation. Just a barbecue and a few beers here in our camp. I would like that, she said softly. Now I must go. I will walk you home, Rob offered as she smiled at him. On the rocks, Herbie was about to swing the long rod overhead when he saw the two leaving the camp. He nearly tumbled off the rock with surprise. I'll be damned, he mused. Dankie dat jy like, subscribe, share en die bel button druk. Ek is net op soek hier na my potlood om te merk waar ek môre aand moet aangaan. Een van die kinders het dit seker gevat. Geniet jou aand verder, ek lees môre aand weer.